A mother says goodbye to her daughter in the morgue, but notices something moving in her belly and makes a discovery that gives her goosebumps. Mariela woke up before sunrise. The alarm clock didn't even go off. Her eyes were already open, staring at the ceiling of the room, trying to muster the courage to get up. Her whole body ached. There was a strange heaviness on her shoulders, as if she had spent the night carrying bags of cement on her back. But no, it was just fatigue. A fatigue that came from within, the kind that even sleep cannot help. She slowly turned onto her side and saw Julian, her husband, asleep with his face half buried in the pillow. He made a soft noise, like a whistle when he breathed. She smiled. Although she was tired, she liked to see him there so peaceful. They had been married for just over a year, and despite everything, she felt loved. It wasn't a soap opera kind of love. It was simple, quiet, but it was love. She crawled slowly to the bathroom. She did everything at her own pace. She stared at the mirror for a few seconds. She touched her face. Her skin was a little pale, her eyes swollen. She let out a sigh. It wasn't out of vanity. It was just the shock of seeing herself looking so exhausted. In the kitchen, she made coffee and stood leaning against the sink, holding the cup with both hands. The smell of coffee was the only thing that made the day seem normal. Then she prepared 2 cloth bags. She had to go to the market. She always went every day. It was like a sacred routine for her. "Mariela, do you want me to go with you today?" asked Julian, coming out of the room, scratching his head, still half asleep. "No, honey, you have to work." "I'm fine. I'll be quick." "Are you sure? Have you been so tired?" "I like going. It does me good." He looked at her for a few seconds, then kissed her on the forehead and said, "Take care." Mariela got ready calmly. She put on loose pants, a blouse she liked because it covered her belly a little, comfortable shoes, and left. The market was 3 blocks from the house, but the walk seemed longer every day. She walked slowly, stopping to catch her breath. The sun wasn't strong yet, but the heat was already starting to bother her, and her legs felt like stone. Every step was an effort. Even so, she smiled at her neighbors. She greeted the lady at the bakery. She helped an elderly woman cross the street with her walker. It was as if she were trying to maintain a normal life, even though her body was screaming that she couldn't take it anymore. Inside the supermarket, she walked through the aisles as if she were in a park. She liked the cold silence of the aisles, the colors of the products. She picked up things she didn't even need that much, just for the pleasure of choosing. It was the only time of day when she felt like she was in control of something, of some decision. She picked up rice, beans, a box of juice that Julian liked, then a sweet bread for herself. She knew she shouldn't, but it was the only little treat she allowed herself. In the checkout line, she felt a slight dizziness. She leaned on the cart. It passed. She paid, smiled at the cashier, and left. But on the street, the light felt stronger, the cars noisier. The world spun slowly. Mariela pressed the bags against her chest, trying to find her balance. She felt sweat running down her back. Her hands went numb. Her heart was beating strangely. She tried to cross the street, just a few more steps, but her body didn't respond. The bags fell to the ground first, the sound of rice rolling across the pavement, the juice exploding. When she fell, it all happened in a second, and no one understood what was going on. All they saw was Mariela's body falling in the middle of the street, as if something invisible had pushed her. It was a hard, sudden fall. Her body fell slowly, but the impact was hard. Her arm hit the sidewalk, her head turned to one side. She didn't move, and there was no sound. A man coming out of the pharmacy was the first to run over. Ma'am, are you okay?" But Mariela didn't respond. Her eyes were closed, her mouth half open. She still had a piece of sweet bread in her mouth that she had bitten into a few minutes earlier. Other people began to approach. A girl took her cell phone out of her pocket and called emergency services. A woman fell down. "She's not moving." A woman knelt down next to the body. She put her hand on Mariela's chest. "I can't feel anything." The cars began to honk their horns. Some turned around, others stopped. It was just another day in the middle of the morning. But there, on that stretch of road, time stood still. People gathered around, cell phones recording, loud voices, confusion, and amidst it all, her total silence. The ambulance arrived quickly. Sirens, 4 paramedics. One got out with the defibrillator in his hand, another with oxygen. They formed a circle around Mariela, carefully removed her blouse, and made space. One of the paramedics whispered, "It looks like cardiac arrest." The shocks began. 1, 2, 3. Mariela reacts. Come on, come on. Nothing. They gave her adrenaline directly into her vein. Heart massage, oxygen mask, sweat dripping from the faces of the paramedics. They tried everything. Everything. Let's take her quickly. There's still a chance. In the ambulance, the atmosphere was tense. All you could hear were the sounds of the machines trying to find some sign of life. A heartbeat, a breath, anything. But the monitor continued to show a straight line. At the hospital, they took her straight to the emergency room. More adrenaline, more attempts. The team was experienced. They knew what to do. And yet nothing worked. The minutes passed, and each minute was like a hammer blow to the hearts of those who watched. The hospital hallway was filled with an eerie silence. Those cold hallways with too much white light seemed to be holding their breath. No one spoke. Only occasionally could the distant sound of a monitor beeping or a stretcher rolling in the background be heard. Julian was sitting on an old plastic bench with his head down, his hands clasped, his elbows resting on his legs. His foot was moving non-stop. It was his body trying to cope with what his mind still refused to accept. He stared at the floor, fixed on any point. Everyone was spinning slowly. Across the hallway, Sarah paced back and forth, nervous, her hand on her chest. Every 3 steps, she murmured a prayer in Spanish. Her eyes filled with tears and her words coming out broken. Lord, please take care of her. Please. Time seemed to stand still until the door to the room opened with a soft click. The doctor came out with his head bowed. The mask still covered half of his face, but his eyes said it all. They were tired, defeated eyes, like those of someone who had tried everything and still lost. He stood in front of Julian, took a deep breath, and removed his mask. "I'm sorry she didn't make it." For a second, no one moved. The sentence hung in the air, as if no one knew what to do with those words. Julian's world simply shut down. He fell to his knees, his arms hanging limply, as if he had been punched in the chest. His breathing stopped, and when he managed to make a sound, it was a groan. It wasn't crying. It was pain. Pain from the soul that pervades the entire body. He covered his face with his hands and began to move back and forth as if he wanted to protect himself from a wave that could not be stopped. "Mariela, no, no, my love, no." Sarah let out a scream that echoed throughout the hospital. My God, my girl did not lean against the wall to keep from falling. Her legs were shaking, her eyes wide open, filled with tears. The scream turned into a sob, then a prayer, then silence. The silence of someone who has lost their footing. She went over to where Julian was. She knelt down beside him and hugged him tightly. The two of them cried in each other's arms in the middle of the hallway. A desperate, raw cry of someone who had not prepared their heart to say goodbye like this. Of someone who never imagined that this ordinary day would end this way. The doctor stood there for a few seconds, lowered his head, and went back into the room, leaving the hallway in silence. And at that moment, time stopped forever in the heart of those who loved Mariela. The waiting room was almost empty. A bench here, another there, occupied by someone who didn't even know what to say. An acquaintance from church, a distant cousin, the doorman of the building where Mariela lived when she was a child. People who came more out of respect than closeness. The silence between people was uncomfortable. They avoided looking each other in the eye. What can you say in the face of such pain? The hospital had a strong smell of disinfectant, one of those smells that stays on your clothes and in your memory forever. At the end of the hallway, a worker pushed an empty stretcher by. The footsteps echoed. Everything seemed slower, grayer. Julian sat without saying much, his eyes red, his face pale, his beard unshaven, his hands folded in his lap, clutching a tissue that was already wet. He stared ahead as if waiting for someone to walk through that door and say it was all a mistake, that Mariela was alive, that it was just a scare. But no one came. Sarah, the mother, remained standing, leaning against the wall, her face swollen from crying, her lipstick smudged, her fingers trembling. From time to time she whispered, "My girl was my little girl," as if she were talking to someone who could still hear her. A social worker appeared with a board in her hand. She spoke in a low voice. "The body will be prepared now. We have already activated your insurance. The burial will be at the end of the afternoon at nightfall as you requested. We have already contacted the funeral home." Sarah nodded slightly. She didn't have the strength for anything else. Mariela, 29 years old. A woman, they said, always smiling, always wanting to appear strong, but very ill, much more than she showed. Some commented without malice, only with sadness. A woman but very sick, weak heart, sudden death, nothing to be done. Her body would be taken away shortly. A few meters away behind a closed door lay her cold body, silent, untouched by time, and although many people passed by, she was alone inside. The sound of the air conditioning made a constant cold, emotionless hum. It was a place that seemed designed to keep feelings at bay. But there in that secluded corner was a broken man. Julian entered slowly. He walked shuffling his feet as if each step weighed heavily on him. He stopped next to the stretcher. The white sheet covered almost everything, but her face was still there. Mariela, her eyes were closed, her skin very pale, her lips slightly parted. She looked like she was sleeping, a very deep sleep. He pulled the chair carefully as if afraid of waking her. He sat very close, his hands shaking. For a few seconds, he just looked at her. He was looking for some answer in her, a sign that it wasn't true, a movement, a sigh, anything. But there was nothing. Julian reached out and took her hand. It was cold, and that hurt him inside. With trembling fingers, he caressed the back of her hand, brought it to his lips, and gave it a long, unhurried kiss. As if that kiss had to say everything he couldn't say to her in life. "I promise to protect you." His voice came out broken, almost without strength, and he couldn't. The tears troll abyss, first thick and silent. Then the snot came. He tried to hold it in, but he couldn't. His chest and body were shaking. He cried like a child, his head resting on the edge of the stretcher, still holding her hand tightly, as if that could bring her back. "Forgive me, my love. I didn't see. I didn't understand. I didn't do anything." He spoke between sobs with broken, confused words. They were apologies. They were memories. They were promises thrown to the wind. Time seemed to have stopped just for him. At that moment, only Julian and she existed. No one else. He caressed her face tenderly, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, and adjusted the sheet as he used to do when she slept, and complained of being cold. He touched her chin with his fingers as if he wanted to keep that face with him forever. "Do you remember when you said you wanted to go first? That you were afraid of being left alone? Well, now I'm the one who's left." He closed his eyes and rested his forehead against hers. He remained like that in silence, only the soft sound of crying mixed with the cold air in the room. No one came in. No one interrupted. It was as if the world had understood that this moment belonged only to him and Mariela. Time passed, but he didn't count it. It could have been a few minutes. It could have been an hour. What remained there was the image of a broken man holding the hand of the woman he loved, trying to say goodbye when his heart was still screaming, "Stay." Hours later, the light in the mortuary was even colder than that in the hospital. The white walls, no pictures, no signs of life, just the strong smell of chemicals and the muffled sound of their own footsteps. It was a place where death did not need to be mentioned. It was everywhere. A worker in a gown approached slowly with a small table in her hand. "The coffin has arrived. They are going to dress her. Julian was leaning against the wall, his eyes still swollen, his breathing short. He looked at the woman, not knowing how to respond. His head said yes, but his heart begged to wait. He closed his eyes for a moment and swallowed. "I'll do it," he tried to say, but his voice broke. He looked up at the ceiling and took a deep breath. "No, I can't." Sarah, who was sitting next to him, got up with effort, her face tired, her body hunched over, but with steady eyes. She wiped her tears with the sleeve of her blouse. "I'll go. I'll dress her like when she was little." She left silently. She went to Mariela's house to look for clothes. She knew exactly what to take, a flowery dress that she herself had given to her daughter. A lightweight, short-sleeved fabric that Mariela said made her look less tired. She also grabbed a new pair of panties, a simple bracelet, and a pair of socks, all carefully folded. When she returned, she entered the room alone. She asked for a moment. The workers respected her request. Sarah closed the door, placed the clothes on a metal chair, and went to the stretcher where Mariela's body lay waiting. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "Here I am, my girl." She began to carefully remove the hospital gown. First, she untied the back, then pulled on the sleeves. She touched the body tenderly, as if it was still fragile. Her eyes, though filled with tears, had the same sweetness as when she cared for her daughter as a little girl. It was then that she stopped. Something strange happened. The sheet covering the body moved slightly. She froze. Her heart was beating fast. She looked again carefully and saw it. Mariela's belly moved. It was small, like a wave, a slight but visible movement. The skin on her belly jumped a little. Then it remained still. 1 second. 2. Sarah took a step back without breathing. What? What is that? The silence in the room seemed to mock her. She approached again, stretched out her hand fearfully, and carefully touched her daughter's belly. It was warm, and there was a heartbeat, weak but alive. She screamed, a desperate, almost crazy scream. "It's moving. There's something in her belly. My daughter's belly is moving." The people nearby froze. 2 nurses looked at each other, confused. A nursing technician carrying a tray stopped in her tracks. A strange silence filled the hallway for a few seconds, as if time had stopped again. The head of the area, a woman in a white coat, her hair pulled back in a tight bun and a clipboard in her hand, walked towards her with quick steps. "Mrs. Sarah, please come with me. You are in shock. What you are feeling is normal in grief." But Sarah wouldn't let anyone near the door. "I'm not crazy. I saw it." The belly moved. "She's alive, my daughter. There's life inside her." The words came out with difficulty, but firmly. She was shaking from head to toe, her face covered in tears, her hair disheveled, but there was something in her eyes, a certainty, a strength that no one could ignore. The head of the department took a deep breath and tried to keep her tone calm. "Ma'am, often the body has involuntary movements, spasms, gas, normal things. You've been through a lot." At that moment, a younger employee on the other side of the hallway heard everything. His name was Damien. He was a nursing assistant. He hadn't been there long, but when he heard that, he took 2 steps forward with a frown. "I know her. That lady is not hallucinating. She wouldn't scream like that if she wasn't sure." The head of the department turned to look at him impatiently. "Damien, we can't waste time on this." "But what if it's true?" Silence returned again. For a second, no one said anything. Damien walked through the crowd, went up to Sarah and whispered, "Where did it go? Where did you see it move?" Sarah, her hands trembling, pointed into the room. "When I was putting her clothes on, I saw it." Here she touched her own belly, showing where the movement had occurred. It moved like a little wave. Without asking permission, Damien entered. The room was still the same, cold, quiet, with the flowered dress on the chair. Mariela's body was still on the stretcher, not moving, but something felt different. He approached carefully, stood there for a few seconds, then put his hand on her belly. He closed his eyes, trying to feel something. Silence. Nothing. 1 more second, and then he felt it. It was almost invisible, but it was there. A small movement, like a weak pulse, a little push under the skin, as if something inside was asking for help. Damien opened his eyes wide, ran out of the room and shouted, "Yes, it's moving. It's alive. We need a doctor." Right away, the hallway, which had been quiet, exploded with movement. People came out from everywhere, and what was thought to be the end suddenly became an emergency. A mother's cry was not ignored. In seconds, nurses, technicians, and onlookers were trying to understand what was happening. But the real tension began when Dr. Elena entered. She was known for her white hair tied back in a simple bun and for never raising her voice. She was an old doctor at the hospital with more than 30 years of experience in emergencies. When she appeared in the hallway, everything calmed down. Her voice had a weight that didn't need to shout to be heard. "What's going on here?" she asked as she put on her gloves. "Abdominal movement, doctor," said Damien, still agitated, very slight but real. I felt it. She didn't respond. She just went in. The room was still cold. Mariela's body on the stretcher, motionless, silent, everything the same. But now, with a lingering doubt in the air, the doctor approached slowly, lifted the sheet up to her belly, looked, touched with her fingertips, then took a small, worn stethoscope out of her pocket. She placed it slowly on her chest, then on her belly. She waited, closed her eyes, and then heard a soft, rhythmic sound, very faint, like a distant drum beating at the bottom of the sea. She remained motionless for a few seconds, as if she needed to confirm it. She changed the position of the device, adjusted it, listened again, and her eyes opened wide in surprise. My God! She ran out of the room. "Emergency! Prepare a room!" Everyone looked at each other, trying to understand. The head of the department tried to ask, "What's going on, doctor?" She replied firmly without looking away. "She's pregnant and the baby is alive. And not only that, she also has minimal brain activity. She's alive. She's still alive." The phrase struck the team like a bolt of lightning. No one could react. Some froze, others ran. They turned on machines, prepared the equipment, called intensive care. Meanwhile, in another part of the hospital, Julian stood in a corner of the reception area staring blankly into space. He didn't eat. He didn't talk. His hands clasped in his lap. He just existed. A nurse ran up to him. "Mr. Gonzalez, quick, you have to come. Your wife is alive. Your wife has a baby, and she's alive." It took Julian a few seconds to understand what he had just heard. "What? What did you say?" The nurse bent down and put his hands on his shoulders. "She's not dead. She's alive. She has a baby, and the baby is alive." Julian stood up suddenly and stumbled. His face turned white, his eyes wide open, his whole body frozen. He tried to take a step, but his legs wouldn't respond. And then suddenly everything went black. He fainted right there in the nurse's arms, because there are things the body cannot bear. And there are miracles the heart does not know how to receive. The examination room had become a sanctuary of tension. No one spoke aloud. Dr. Elena, along with 3 other doctors, prepared the equipment with steady hands, but her face showed the gravity of the moment. Outside, nurses piled up nervously, and Sarah sat with her hands clasped to a nurse, her rosary tangled in her fingers and her eyes fixed on a closed door. Mariela was connected again to the machines. Everything was done with great care, as if any mistake could change destiny. The heart monitor flashed slowly. The electrodes stuck to her sweaty skin. Her skin cold, but not as pale as before. The silence in the room was total. Elena put gel on the ultrasound machine. She gently touched Mariela's belly, moving the sensor in gentle circles, her eyes fixed on the screen. Suddenly, there was a soft rhythmic sound like timid knocks on a door. It was a heart, a tiny heart fighting. "There it is," murmured Eleanor. "Move." The other doctors approached, all looking at the image. Now it was clear the baby was moving perfectly. Alive, breathing inside her, a life growing in silence, protected by a body that the world had already given up for dead. "She is approximately 7 months pregnant," confirmed Elena, her voice trembling. "The baby is well positioned, normal activity." But there was more. Another test was done afterwards, this time to check on Mariela. The doctor placed the electrodes around her head, adjusted the inkfilogram machine, observed, waited. The minutes seemed endless, and then there were signs. Weak brain waves. Yes, but there they were. Elena slowly turned to her colleagues. "She is alive." The silence turned to sighs. A nurse began to cry softly. Outside, when the news arrived, no one could believe it. Sarah fell to her knees. Her hands were shaking. The rosary slipped from her lap. Her eyes filled with hot tears, now mixed with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Julian, who had already been woken up after fainting, returned, staggering, leaning on a nurse. When he heard the word alive, he said nothing, just leaned against the wall and began to laugh and cry at the same time. A quiet, nervous laugh from someone who doesn't know whether to be grateful, to doubt, or to break down again. The doctors who had signed the death certificate were called. One of them, with his head bowed, muttered something like, "We didn't hear anything." We thought another tried to justify. Her weight complicated everything. Her breathing was very weak. Her heartbeat almost inaudible. I've never seen anything like it. But no one wanted excuses. The hospital administration removed them from the case immediately. It was not the time to look for someone to blame, but neither could they be trusted anymore. The truth was there. Alive in a hospital bed, Mariela, alive, pregnant, breathing softly, almost imperceptibly, but breathing. And inside her, a tiny heart beating with all the strength that the world failed to see. The sound of the beep, beep, beep of the monitor filled the room like a reminder. There was still life, weak, silent, but life. When the doctors confirmed the diagnosis, no one could believe it. Apparent death syndrome, a very rare condition where the body seems to have shut down, but the soul continues to fight. And there in that bed, Mariela was fighting in silence. They intubated her quickly. The tube went down her throat without any reaction. Her eyes remained closed, motionless. It was as if she were asleep, in a deep sleep, too deep. But now the machines were all around her, on alert, checking everything, heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen. Next to the bed was another machine, a fetal monitor. The baby was also being monitored, small but strong. Each heartbeat was as if to say, "Here I am." Inside that fragile body, two hearts were fighting. The doctors raced against time, prepared a special room, and isolated the ward. It was necessary to have silence, controlled temperature, low light, everything to give Mariela the minimum of comfort. Mariela, even if she couldn't feel it, and to the baby who needed peace to continue growing. Julian watched everything standing outside the room, with his forehead pressed against the glass, his hands on the wall, as if somehow he could give her strength. He spoke softly, as if she could hear him. "I'm waiting for you, my love. You can do it." The medical team was torn between hope and fear. They knew that every hour was crucial. The nurses checked her vital signs every 15 minutes. Every time her heart rate changed slightly, everyone felt a chill. On the sheet next to the bed was written in red letters, "Extremely high-risk pregnant woman in induced coma. Continuous monitoring." Eleanor, the most experienced doctor, sat down next to the bed for a few minutes. She gently took Mariela's hand, the same hand that hours earlier had seemed lifeless. Now, although it didn't move, it was warm. She took a deep breath and said softly, "Fight, Mariela. For you. For him." And she stayed there in silence. The family's pain was evident in every gesture. Sarah walked through the hallways with a rosary in her hands, praying non-stop. Every time she saw a doctor come out, her heart felt like it was going to jump out of her chest. She couldn't eat, sleep, or breathe properly. But she stood firm for her daughter and for the grandchild she had not yet seen. That night was long. The hospital did not sleep. Nurses took turns, doctors changed shifts, but returned to see how she was doing. The news had already spread. Some came just to see with their own eyes, others brought silence and respect. No one spoke loudly because everyone knew now. It was a race against time, a woman unconscious, a baby still in her womb, two hearts trying together to keep beating. In the intensive care unit, time seemed to stand still. It was as if every second lasted an eternity. The light in the room was soft, low so as not to hurt her eyes. But she couldn't see, couldn't hear, she didn't move. Mariela was lying there, connected to so many cables, so many machines that you could hardly see her whole body, only her face. Pale and calm, as if she were asleep after crying a lot. She was in a deep coma. Diagnosis confirmed, weak heart beating with the help of medication. She was breathing thanks to the machines. And in her womb a baby was growing slowly, steadily, as if unaware of what was happening outside. The doctors were doing what they could. Visits were restricted. Only one person was allowed in at a time. Julian was the one who came most often. He would sit there with her hand in his. He would spend hours there, not talking much, just looking at her. Sometimes he would cry silently. Other times he would tell her stories in a low voice. "Do you remember our first trip, my love? That horrible hotel that you said smelled of damp and had cold coffee. We laughed so much, I looked at you and thought, this is the woman I want to grow old with." He spoke as if he were waiting for a response, but it never came. No sign, no blink. Nothing. The machines didn't stop. They made noise constantly, but the numbers were always the same, stable but low, like a thin line between what is alive and what could shut down at any moment. The nurses changed the bandages, moisturized his dry lips, and wiped his face with a damp cloth to maintain contact with his skin, even though he couldn't feel it. One of them said the baby was monitored all the time. The sound of his little heart came out of a small speaker next to the bed, a fragile sound but constant, like a drum beating from afar. The only sound that seemed to say, "We are here." Every day that passed, hope rose and fell. Some doctors were already talking about risk. Others said that miracles exist, but no one knew for sure. What was known was that time now had a different rhythm. Every minute was an opportunity. Every hour a battle. Sarah prayed outside, walking with her knees sore from kneeling so much. She slept in a plastic chair with her face resting on her arm. She had aged about 10 years in 3 days, but she didn't leave. Every day she asked, "Is she still the same?" And the answer was always the same. Yes, she's still the same. She hadn't gotten worse, but she hadn't gotten better either. The feeling was that Mariela was trapped in a place where no one could reach her, neither with words nor with medicine. Only she knew what she felt inside, and perhaps only she knew the strength she was using to keep going. Time didn't pass in there, it just waited. Julian walked through the hospital as if he no longer knew where to step. His feet moved, but his soul did not. The hallways all looked the same, cold, too bright, full of people walking quickly, talking quietly. He couldn't hear well, he only saw shadows passing by. His face was tired, his dark circles pronounced, his hair unkempt, his shirt wrinkled. He no longer knew how many days he had been there. Sometimes he stopped. He leaned against the wall, ran his hands over his eyes, over his face, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. But the nightmare did not go away. It was real. Very real. Why did this happen? He muttered to himself, his voice broken, barely audible. He entered Mariela's room with slow steps. The door made a small click as it closed. Inside, everything was the same as always. She was lying there, motionless, connected to tubes, the beeps sounding monotonously. The only difference was that now the sun was shining through the side window, drawing a golden strip on the floor. But she was still there, silent. Julian pulled up a chair, sat down beside her and looked at her for a long time. He no longer had tears in his eyes, just a lost look, like someone who doesn't understand, like someone who asks himself 1,000 questions and finds no answers. "My love," he said softly, taking her hand tenderly. "What did we do wrong? Why did this happen to you? You who always took care of everyone, and now you're here unable to open your eyes." He lowered his head. His shoulders were shaking, but he was no longer crying as before. It was the dry crying of someone who had already cried too much, of someone who was tired of trying to understand. He carefully took his cell phone out of his pocket, unlocked it, searched through her favorite songs. Favorite songs found it, and pressed play. The melody slowly filled the room. It was an old, soft song in Spanish, one she always played when she washed the dishes or baked cakes. Julianne remembered her exactly humming that chorus with the dishcloth on her shoulders and her bare feet in the kitchen. He left the cell phone next to the bed. "Do you remember this song? You always said it was ours." He smiled a little, then sighed deeply again. He waited, watched, but Mariela did not react. No sign, no movement, no blinking. The song ended. The next one started on its own, and he stood there without moving, just listening, just waiting, just loving, even though there was no response, because loving someone also means staying by their side when everyone else is gone. The news didn't take long to spread. Someone from the hospital commented, someone else shared it. And soon the story was everywhere, first in messaging groups, then on local websites, then on the biggest portals, exaggerated headlines, old photos of Mariela, videos of seconds taken out of context. The most repeated headline was always the same. Woman is pronounced dead, but baby is found alive in her body. At first it seemed like a miracle, and it was. But the internet rarely welcomed such stories with affection. The comments came flooding in. People who had never seen Mariela, who had never looked her in the eye, began to give their opinions as if they knew everything. How could no one have known she was pregnant at that size? Of course, the diagnosis was going to be wrong. That's her negligence, irresponsible. She neglected her health. Now look what happened. They called her careless, reckless. People said she should have looked in the mirror, that no one gets pregnant without realizing it. Others even laughed. They made jokes about her weight, about the hospital, about everything. Poisonous, dry, cold comments. Julian read some of them. He stopped. He couldn't understand how anyone could attack a person who was in a coma, who was fighting for her life, who was good, who was his Mariela. But the one who felt it the most was Sarah. The screenshots arrived on her cell phone. Some friends sent them to her indignantly, but she remained silent. She didn't respond. She didn't comment. She just stared at the screen, at the words, at the judgments. She placed her cell phone gently on the table. She adjusted her glasses with a trembling hand, then walked to the hospital window. She stood there staring into space with a heavy heart. She wanted to scream. She wanted to defend her daughter. She wanted to say that no one knew what Mariela was feeling, what she was carrying, what she was facing alone. But she didn't say it. She just cried quietly, with her back turned to everyone, because sometimes silence is the only way to protect someone who can no longer defend themselves. On the third night in a row without sleeping well, Julian decided to go home alone for a few hours. He needed to change his clothes, take a shower, breathe a little outside the hospital, but he didn't know that it was worse. Staying there watching Mariela without reacting, or returning to a place where everything had her scent. The house seemed frozen in time, the lights off, the dishes in the sink, the crooked cushion on the couch, a glass half full of water still on the table, everything just as she had left it. She entered slowly, almost asking permission from the silence. In the room, her pillow still bore the imprint of her head. Her favorite blouse was lying on the couch. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked around the room, trying to understand if this was a home or just another painful memory. It was when he saw the cardboard box under the dressing table, a simple box closed with tape. He pulled it out slowly. Inside were several mixed items, photos, birthday cards, old magazines, and in the middle a small notebook with a blue cover already half worn at the edges. He recognized it instantly. It was her diary. She stood there for a few seconds, looking at the notebook. She wondered if she should open it, if it was okay. But at that moment, she just wanted to feel close to her in some way. So she read it. Mariela's handwriting was round and firm, but on some pages it was shaky. The first notes were dates, grocery lists, little memories. But then came the pain. Today I felt invisible again. Julian loves me, but sometimes I feel like he doesn't really see me. I'm tired all the time. I don't know if it's my body or my soul. Maybe being a mother isn't for me. Maybe the universe has already decided that. Each sentence was like a stab in the heart. He read and wiped his eyes with his shirt sleeve. Sometimes he would stop, press the notebook against his chest, as if he wanted to embrace what she was feeling, as if he could turn back time and say, "I did see you, my love. I did see you." But it was too late. On the last page, with almost no space left, there was only one line. "I'm trying to be strong, even if no one notices." She closed the notebook slowly, sat there with the diary on her lap, staring at the floor, and cried silently, like someone who carries the world on their shoulders and doesn't want to make a sound. Because now he knew how much she was suffering inside, and he hadn't seen it. Every week that passed, the intensive care doctors performed the same ritual, the ultrasound of the baby. It was the only moment when the room for a few minutes seemed to breathe differently, as if everyone there forgot about the coma, the tubes, the pain, and remembered that inside that silent body there was another heart beating, small but strong. Mariela remained motionless, her eyes closed, her skin cold, her face calm, but inside her there was life. Dr. Elena always performed the tests with steady hands and great respect. First of all, she adjusted the pillow, ran her hand slowly over Mariela's belly, and spoke softly, even though she knew that perhaps Mariela couldn't hear her. "Let's see your miracle today." Yes. She applied the gel and moved the device carefully. The image appeared on the screen, shapes, lights, movements. It was him, the baby, growing, moving, kicking sometimes as if to say, "Here I am." The nurses gathered around. Some smiled, others cried silently. With each new ultrasound, the baby looked bigger, stronger, his little head already well formed, his arms bent, his spine perfectly outlined. "He's fighting in there," a nurse said once, her eyes filled with tears. "That child has a brave soul." Julian, who was standing next to her, covered his face with both hands. He wanted to smile, but he couldn't stop crying. He was at a loss as to what to do. Then he leaned in and placed his forehead on Mariela's belly, his eyes closed. "Hello, son, it's me, your dad." He spoke with a mixture of fear and hope, as if talking to a dream he didn't want to wake up from. "We're waiting for you, champ, but hang in there a little longer." Yes. The heartbeat on the screen was always monitored very carefully, and every time it came out strong, even the doctors let out a small sigh of relief. It was as if that baby was saying every week, "I'm still fighting for myself and for her." And the miracle happened one day at a time. The early morning was quiet, almost silent. The only sounds were those of the monitors in the intensive care room, where Mariela remained motionless, connected to so many cables that her body was almost invisible. The 8-month-old baby was still strong, everyone said. But that night, everything changed. It was almost 3 a.m. when Nurse Mariana, who was on duty, noticed something strange in the signs. Mariela's heart, which was already low, began to change a lot. A beep sounded louder. She approached the bed, looked at the monitor, and called on the intercom. "Dr. Elena, please come now." Seconds later, her breathing stopped. The oxygen line dropped. The number 0 appeared on the screen. Mariana screamed, stopped, 0 breathing. The room turned into chaos in seconds. 2 doctors came running in. Elena arrived behind them with her face mask hanging around her neck and her eyes wide open. Mariela was very pale, her lips purple, her chest not moving. Ambu, quick adrenaline. They began to resuscitate her. Heart massage, medicines, tubes, IV. Her body rose and fell with the compressions. Unresponsive Julian, who was sleeping in the hallway, woke up to the noise. He tried to go in, but a nurse stopped him. "Wait outside." Inside, only tension. The baby's heart also began to slow down. The fetal monitor was sounding an alarm. The heartbeat was fast and suddenly began to fail. Elena shouted, "We're going to lose them." Those were minutes of panic. One of those moments that no one forgets. Every second was dangerous. Her life and that of her child were hanging by an invisible thread. And then a sound was heard, a heartbeat. Then another faint, but it came back. Air flowed back in. Mariela's chest rose. The baby responded. Its heartbeat stabilized. The room did not celebrate. No one smiled. There was only silence, a weariness that hurt even in the bones. Mariana looked at Elena. Her eyes were filled with tears. "Doctor." And now Elena slowly removed her gloves, took a deep breath and said in a hoarse voice, "We have to wait, but we don't have time." And she left the room with her hands shaking, knowing that at any moment it could all be over. That morning, the intensive care unit was quieter than usual. Mariela still didn't move. Her body was still holding on, but she seemed more fragile every day. The baby was still fighting hard as always, but time was becoming an enemy. The doctor had already said so. Any moment could be the last. Julian entered with slow steps. His face looked tired, with a stubble beard and dark circles under his eyes from crying so much in silence. He pulled up a chair and sat down next to the bed. He took Mariela's hand and held it with all the care in the world, as if it could break. He sat there in silence for a few minutes. He closed his eyes and stayed like that, and then there was a slight movement, almost imperceptible. The little finger of her left hand moved. Julian opened his eyes wide, got up slowly, and for a second he was breathless. Mariela called. He softly touched her hand again, looked carefully, and the finger moved again, very slightly. But it was real. A nurse came in. He pointed, "Move." I saw her move. She came closer, looked, took the chart. It could have been a spasm. It's normal in some cases. But Julian shook his head, his eyes filled with tears. No, it wasn't a spasm. It was her. It was my Mariela. He had no way of proving it, but he felt it. Something inside him told him. She heard him and she responded. Later that same day, he went home, took a clean notebook and a pen. He sat on the terrace where the wind was blowing gently and began to write. It was a letter to the child she didn't know yet, but somehow already loved more than anything else in the world. "Hello, son." The words came out slowly with emotion. He wrote through tears, through memories, through fears and dreams. "If you come into the world, I want you to know that your mother held you, even without waking up." Her handwriting trembled. She would stop, take a deep breath and continue. "She took care of you from day one. And even though she couldn't see you grow in her belly as she wanted to, she fought for you. Every beat of your heart, my son, was because of her body, because of her love." He closed the notebook lovingly, placed his hand on her shirt over her belly as if she could already feel her child there with her, and she stood there looking up at the sky, waiting for her, for him, for everything that could still happen. The days turned into weeks. In intensive care, Mariela remained lying down, motionless, breathing with the help of machines. The tubes, the monitors, the syringes, everything was still there as part of her body. Her belly was now bigger, rounder, firmer, more visible. It was impossible not to notice it. She was carrying life there, and everyone who entered that room could feel it. The baby was growing strong. The tests showed that his little heart was beating strongly. The doctors said he was a fighter, that somehow, even though his mother was not waking up, he was developing well. But time was no longer on her side. The estimated due date was approaching, and with it fear. Each new day was a risk. Mariela's body was at its limit. Her heart remained fragile. The doctors gathered in silence, papers in hand, exchanging serious glances. A decision had to be made. They couldn't wait any longer. Julian listened to everything in silence. He always stayed in the corner of the room with his hands crossed, looking at the floor. Sometimes he would look at her belly and say, "It won't be long now, my love. Hang in there just a little longer." And then he would go back to being quiet. Sarah was also always nearby. She didn't even cry anymore. She just prayed with faith, with anger, with desperation all at once. She ran her hand over her daughter's belly very gently and said, "Your baby is fine, daughter. He's fine." But Mariela still didn't respond. The doctors began to do daily evaluations. They monitored everything second by second, and the phrase most often heard in the hallways was always the same. "We have to plan for the delivery, but we don't have time." It was like holding a glass full of water, shaking, about to fall. With every change, every sign, everyone's heart tightened. The baby was ready to be born, but no one knew if Mariela would hold on. It was the most difficult wait in the world because it wasn't just for the birth of a child. It was for the life of a mother who still hadn't returned. It was a night that seemed like any other. Quiet, tense, full of flashing machines, the regular noises of the equipment, and that heavy silence that only exists in intensive care units. The team was tired but attentive. The C-section had already been scheduled. Everything was being prepared carefully. Only a few more days to go, a little more waiting. But life has its own timing. It was past midnight when Nurse Mariana entered the room to check the vital signs. Mariela's heart monitor was a little faster than usual, her temperature higher than normal. She approached with the chart in her hand, touched the patient's face, and felt sweat. Her forehead was wet. Her hands, too. "How strange," she murmured. She went to write it down when she heard a different sound, a wet crackling, then water. She looked. The bed was wet. The nurse's eyes widened. "No, it can't be." She approached the belly and saw visible contractions, gentle but steady. The water had broken. The nurse ran down the hall shouting, "She's going to give birth now. She's going to deliver now." The hospital was put on alert. "That's impossible. She was scheduled for a C-section. She's in a coma." She can't, but it was happening. Mariela's body, though unconscious, was going into labor. Chaos ensued. They called the technicians. The intensive care unit was invaded by nurses, doctors, pediatricians. The room became a whirlwind. Equipment was brought in. Gowns were changed in a hurry. Voices were talking at the same time. "We need to move her now. Fetal monitoring right now." Julian woke up with the noise and ran into the hallway. What happened? What happened to her? Nurse Mariana held him by the arms and said with eyes wide with surprise, "She's in labor right now. Your son is coming." He stood still, unresponsive, his mouth half open, the world spinning around him. Now, but how? Sarah came running in right after. "What's happening to my daughter?" And the answer was harsh, direct from Dr. Elena in a tense voice. "The body has decided it's today, and we're not ready." And at that moment, no one was. Not the doctors, not the family, not the world. But life was ready. The delivery room was filled with hurried voices, short orders, footsteps running from one side to the other, equipment being prepared in a hurry, gloves put on, hands shaking from the speed and tension. Mariela had been rushed from intensive care to the emergency room. The baby's heartbeat was racing. Her body was responding on its own with increasingly strong contractions, but she was still asleep. The team discussed the plan. C-section. There's no time now. The cervix dilated too quickly. It has to be natural. Elena, the most experienced doctor, tried to maintain control of the room, but her eyes couldn't hide her fear. The risk was too great. A natural birth in a coma was madness. But Mariela's body was no longer waiting for anyone. It was then that everything stopped. Eleanor, who was near Mariela's head, saw it. Her eyes moved a little, then again, and then they opened slowly with difficulty, the light in the room hitting her in the face. She blinked, trying to focus. She opened her mouth in almost a whisper. "Where am I?" Elena froze. "Mariela." She moved her head slightly, confused. She looked around with eyes full of fear. Her breathing quickened. The monitor showed her heart rate rising. "She's awake." She woke up. The room was filled with excitement. Some began to cry. Others tried not to break down. It was real. She had come back. After 2 months in a coma, she was back. What? What's going on? Why does it hurt so much? Dr. Elena held her face lovingly in her hands. Listen to me, Mariela. You're in labor. Your baby is coming now. She opened her eyes wide, not understanding. She was dizzy, lost, not knowing what was happening. A baby? Yes, my love, you are pregnant. And now you are going to give birth. She cried, confused, scared, but alive. And the heartbeat kept getting faster. Life had returned at the most impossible moment. In the midst of pain, in the midst of fear, the mother had woken up. And now the child wanted to be born. Mariela's face was still pale, her eyes small, like someone who wakes up from a never-ending nightmare. The light in the delivery room was very bright, the noise very intense, voices coming from all sides, doctors, nurses, instruments being prepared, everything mixed together. She could hardly understand what was happening. Dr. Elena leaned close to her, her eyes filled with tears, trying to stay calm. Mariela, listen to me. What I'm about to tell you is a lot, but I need you to hear me. Yes. Mariela blinked slowly, still dizzy. Her body was shaking. She moved her lips, but no sound came out. 2 months ago, you went into a coma. You had heart failure. We thought you had died. She frowned. She tried to understand, but it was as if her mind was clouded. Death. Elena took her hand. Yes, my love, but you're still alive. And not only that, you're 7, almost 8 months pregnant. Mariela's eyes widened, and she cried instantly. A thick tear rolled down her cheek effortlessly. Her mouth trembled. I have a baby. The doctor nodded. Yes, and it's alive. It's fine, but it's coming now. You're in labor right now. Mariela brought both hands to her belly with difficulty. She touched her body as if it weren't hers, as if it belonged to someone else. And then the pain came, a strong, sharp contraction, like a wave crossing her belly. Oh, my God, she screamed. Her body shrank on its own. It was the pain coming with everything, and she was still confused, trying to piece together her own story. What's happening to me? Why does it hurt so much? The nurses approached, adjusted her position. They were ready. The baby was coming. But Mariela still didn't understand that she was alive. She cried and cried. It wasn't just physical pain. It was fear. It was shock. It was despair. I don't understand. I don't understand anything. Elena approached her and held her face in her hands. I know, my love. I know it's a lot. But now you have to push. You have to do it for him. Mariela, even though she didn't understand, even though she had no strength left, took a deep breath. She felt another contraction rise like thunder, and there, amid tears, sweat, and confusion, she began to fight. Because sometimes love comes before logic, and the body knows what to do, even if the soul still doesn't understand. Time inside that room seemed different. The clock ticked away the hours, but every minute felt like an eternity. Mariela, still confused, still weak, was there, alive and in labor, a birth that no one expected, not even her, breathing with difficulty. Her eyes were red from crying so much, her arms were shaking, but she held on tight to the sides of the bed. The contractions came like violent waves, a pain that pierced everything. But she didn't scream just because of the physical pain. It was her body, her soul, her fear, all coming out at the same time. Push, Mariela, come on, you can do it. You can do it. Dr. Elena, her gown stained with sweat and tension, didn't take her eyes off her. She had delivered many babies in her life, but none like this one. The nurses said things to encourage her. One of them wiped the sweat from her face with a clean cloth. Push again. Mariela screamed with all her might, her face contorted, her lips trembling. She looked at the ceiling at nothing, and then closed her eyes tightly. It hurts. Oh, it hurts so much. I know, my love. I know, but it's almost here. The baby's heart was being monitored in real time. The heartbeat strong, steady, ready. It was as if she was saying, "I'm coming, Mum, don't give up." Mariela took a deep breath, gasping for air as if she had run for miles. "One last time, Mariela. Come on, push with all your might." And she pushed with courage, with pain, with faith. She pushed for everything she had been through, for the loneliness, for the guilt, for her tired body, for the silence, for the opportunity to hold that child in her arms, for life. And then the cry, a sharp, pure, loud cry, the most beautiful sound in the world. The baby was born. They immediately placed him on her chest. His little arms were moving, his eyes closed, his mouth open, crying with all the strength of his tiny body. Mariela slowly opened her eyes, looked at him, touched his soft skin with trembling fingers. "Still warm, still wet, my son," she whispered. Tears ran down her face, but now they were different. They were warm. They were tears of gratitude. "My son, my miracle." She hugged him as if the whole world were there. At that moment, nothing else mattered. The hospital disappeared. The pain was gone. There was only her and him. A miracle that was born after death and taught her that life always finds a way. The Rudum was now different. It was no longer an intensive care unit, no longer a delivery room. It was a simple room with soft light coming in through the window, flowers on a small table beside it, and a light silence. The kind of silence that only exists when peace finally arrives. Mariela was lying down, tired, but awake. Her face was calm, still pale, her eyes sunken, but alive. In her arms the baby slept, wrapped in a white blanket, his little face pressed against her chest. His breathing was so soft that it was almost inaudible, but there it was, constant present. Julian sat down next to the bed with his hands on his knees, looking at the two of them. He stayed there without saying anything, just watching, as if he were still afraid to touch, to break that moment. Mariela looked at him tenderly. She still didn't have the strength for much, but she smiled, a tired smile, but one full of meaning. And then she asked in a soft voice, "What are we going to call him?" Julian took a deep breath, looked at his son, and gently ran his fingers across his forehead with care. "I thought of a name." She looked at him. She waited. "Emmanuel." Her eyes lit up instantly. "God with us," she repeated excitedly. Julian nodded. "Because when we thought God had left us, he was here with us all along." Mariela held the baby a little closer to her chest and closed her eyes. "Emmanuel," she whispered as if making a promise. A few minutes later, the door to the room opened slowly. It was Sarah. She entered without saying a word, her eyes already filled with tears. Her face marked by time, pain, and regret. She stopped in the middle of the room when she saw the scene. Her daughter alive, her grandson in her arms, her legs buckled. She fell to her knees, covered her face with her hands, and began to cry. A loud, heavy cry, full of everything that had been stuck inside her for years. "Forgive me, daughter. I didn't see you." Mariela was silent for a moment, then slowly reached out and touched her mother's shoulder. Sarah approached still on her knees. Mariela lowered her head until her forehead touched hers. The two cried there in silence. It was the first real hug between mother and daughter, without complaints, without pride, without resentment, just love, and a little boy sleeping between them named Emmanuel. A few days passed before Mariela was finally able to stand up, still with help, her steps slow, her arms weak, clinging tightly to the tubes of the bed. The nurse stayed by her side, attentive, but without intervening. It was her moment. Mariela made her way to the bathroom alone, and for the first time since everything had happened, looked in the mirror. The reflection was a shock. Her face was thinner but swollen, pale, her eyes sunken with deep circles, her mouth dry and colorless, her hair tied back haphazardly with some gaps at the roots. But that wasn't what caught her attention the most. It was her body. The loose robe revealed her belly, still marked, still painful, the scar from the probe, the bruise from the catheter, the wrinkles, the cuts, the weight, the image of someone who had experienced something greater than can be explained. She took a deep breath, ran her hand over her belly slowly, her fingers trembling. There were her marks, the ones no one sees from the outside, the ones that carry everything she went through. These marks, she murmured to herself, they are life. She smiled for the first time, not in denial, but with acceptance. A tired smile, but a true one. At that moment, something changed inside her. She looked at herself with the eyes of a mother. She imagined her son running around the yard. She imagined him asking her to play, to run, climbing onto her arm. And there, in front of the mirror, she understood that she had to be strong, not just alive. For the first time, she saw the illness, not as a punishment, but as a calling. The weight, the weak body, the fragility, all of that was always there. But she avoided it. She hid it behind laughter, food, silence. Now she couldn't anymore. She dried her face, looked at herself closely, and said softly, "I'm going to change for myself. For him." Hours later, her mother entered the room. She was carrying clean clothes and a glass of juice. She found Mariela sitting with the baby in her arms, her eyes looking out the window. Sarah stood at the door, not knowing what to say. Then, in a low voice, she said, "Forgive me." Mariela turned to look at her silently. "I didn't take care of you like I should have. I always said it was your body, your life, but you were my daughter, and I should have done more." The words came out softly, full of guilt. Mariela didn't respond immediately. She just looked at her son in her arms. Then she raised her eyes, still tearful, and spoke with tenderness. "Now it doesn't matter. We're still in time." And at that moment, 2 generations understood that it's never too late to start over. That marks are not wounds, they are promises. The reporter held the microphone tightly, her face emotional and her eyes filled with tears. Even though she tried to maintain a journalistic tone, the hospital had provided the small conference room, some makeshift chairs, a camera on a tripod, natural light streaming in through the windows. It wasn't an event. It was a testimony. Mariela entered with slow but confident steps. She was dressed simply, her hair pulled back in a bun, a little makeup applied by a nurse. In Mariela's arms, wrapped in a light blue blanket, the baby slept peacefully. Julian came right behind with his hands on her shoulders, attentive, protective. Silence filled the room. Everyone was there to listen, but no one knew what she was going to say. The reporter approached, adjusted the microphone, asked a brief question respectfully, and then, her voice still weak, Mariela began, "I didn't die on the outside or on the inside, but I lived for years, as if I were slowly dying." She paused, looked at her son in her arms. "They called me irresponsible, careless, but yet no one asked how I was in heat outside, how I felt when climbing stairs. No one looked me in the eyes. When I smiled on the outside and fell apart on the inside." Another pause, her eyes filled with tears, but she continued, "I wasn't invisible. They just didn't look at me with love." The room fell silent. Some began to cry. One nurse squeezed another's hand. The reporter had to take a deep breath before continuing. The story came out that same night. The city saw it. The country saw it. Thousands of people saw that fragile and brave woman tell her story with such truth that it was impossible not to feel something. And that's how something began. People from the neighborhood, people who had never spoken to her, began to knock on Mariela's door with bags of fruit, homemade meals, walking shoes, sincere promises of help. "You're not going through this alone." Health professionals offered support. Nutritionists, trainers, psychologists. Groups were formed to walk in the neighborhood. Support networks were set up. It was as if each person wanted to give Mariela back the love she had previously lacked. And for the first time, she didn't say no. Mariela took on the responsibility with determination. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she wanted to be truly alive. She wanted to run after her son, play on the floor, get up without pain, smile without fear of fainting. She wanted to have a future. And now she knew she could. Because it's not just about losing weight, it's about finding yourself. And with Emmanuel in her arms and an entire community around her, She began one step at a time. The little church in the neighborhood was small, without luxuries. The white walls already showed signs of age, sir. The wooden benches creaked when someone moved. On the altar were simple flowers and a tablecloth embroidered by the hands of one of the local women. But there was something special about that place. It had truth. The bell rang softly that morning, and the neighbors began to arrive little by little. Some wore their Sunday best, others wore whatever they had. No one went to show off, they went to feel. Mariela entered, accompanied by Julian. She walked carefully, still recovering, but with her chest held high. In her arms, Emmanuel, wrapped in a light cold cloth, slept peacefully. She carried him with both arms as if she were carrying her own heart. People stood up respectfully. Many could not hold back their tears. In the end, everyone knew that story. Everyone knew that this baby was more than just a baby. He was a miracle. The ceremony was simple. The priest, a man with a soft voice and steady hands, welcomed the family warmly. He began the ritual with a short prayer. Then he spoke of love, hope, and new beginnings. When it was time for the baptism, Mariela approached the font with slow steps. Emmanuel was still asleep. The priest dipped his fingers in the water and carefully touched the baby's forehead. "I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." The water ran down his soft skin. Emmanuel made a slight movement with his lips, but did not open his eyes. Mariela could not hold back. Tears fell without stopping, a silent, deep cry from someone who had already hit rock bottom and now carried in his arms the reason to keep standing. The priest looked at her, then looked at everyone. This child was formed in silence, but was born into the world. Everyone fell silent. It was true. Emmanuel grew up in darkness, in fear, in pain. He grew up hidden, protected by an almost lifeless body. But he had arrived, and now he belonged to everyone. Mariela held her son close to her chest, kissed his little head, and whispered softly, "Thank you." She didn't know who she was thanking. God, life, pain, love, perhaps all of them. Because at that moment, there in that little church with the smell of wood and incense, with the cramped pews and open windows, she knew that it had all been worth it. The afternoon was hot. Mariela had just bathed Emmanuel and was putting him to bed in his new crib right there in the living room. The window was open and a gentle breeze was coming in, moving the curtains and bringing the smell of coffee from the neighbor's house. It was one of those simple moments that had once seemed impossible. She walked to the kitchen, wiped down the counter with a cloth, and smiled. It was strange to smile without pain, strange but nice. Every gesture of the day now had a different value. Washing a dish, folding a diaper, making tea, everything made sense. Everything seemed sacred. That's when the doorbell rang. Julian, who was in the front yard, ran to the door. There was no one there, just a cardboard box, small, simple, with no return address. He looked around, bent down, picked up the box carefully, and went inside. "Honey, someone left this." Mariela dried her hands on her apron and went to him. They both looked at the box as if it was something valuable. They didn't know what to expect. Julian opened it slowly inside. A single flower. It was the same flower he had left on the coffin the day he thought he had lost Mariela forever. A simple flower, a little crushed but still alive. He recognized it instantly. Trembling, he took it in his hands, and there next to it, carefully folded, was a little piece of paper. Mariela took it carefully, unfolded it. The handwriting was firm, clear. She read it aloud, her voice breaking. "You never stopped breathing. I was just waiting to be heard." Silence filled the room. Julian stood still, holding the flower as if he were holding his own heart. Mariela brought the piece of paper to her chest, closed her eyes, and let the tears fall. It was as if the universe had written that for her. She remembered the days of struggle, the time forgotten in a room, the looks that never came, the pain that no one saw, and now someone had seen, someone had heard. Mariela sat down slowly, hugged Emmanuel, who was sleeping peacefully, and whispered softly, almost without a voice, "I'm here, son, now and forever." 5 months have passed. The house is still simple, full of baby noises, hanging rags, diapers drying in the sun, and toys everywhere. But something in Mariela has changed. The way she walks, the sparkle in her eyes, the way she looks at herself in the mirror. Now every day starts early. Before Emmanuel wakes up, she is already up with her sneakers on and her water bottle in hand. She walks with other women from the neighborhood. She climbs hills, goes down sidewalks, breathes deeply, doesn't run, not yet, but walks like someone who is in a hurry to live. She has already lost 30 kilograms. And more than that, she has shed layers of pain, fear, and shame that were left behind. Mariela doesn't follow crazy diets. She eats real food, goes to the market with her neighbor, cooks with Julian, learns to listen to herself, knows when her body needs rest, and now knows when it's just laziness trying to fool her. She no longer hides in baggy clothes. She wears what she likes. She looks in the mirror without lowering her head. Sometimes she wears lipstick. Other times she goes out with a clean face. And that's okay because every day she loves herself more. On the living room wall, there is a sheet of paper taped to the wall, a handmade calendar with each day marked in red pen. Next to it is another sheet of paper with her own handwriting, telling her to play with him on the floor, to run after him in the yard, to climb the stairs without stopping halfway, to look at me with pride, to live. That is her plan. And every time Emmanuel smiles when she carries him, spins him around, hugs him, laughs with him, she feels that it's all worth it. It's not about having a perfect body. It's about being alive and now complete. This story is not only a miracle, but it has to do with listening, with seeing beyond what is visible. It's about not judging. Because sometimes a person's silence is just a cry for help that no one wants to hear. How did you feel when you heard this story? And if you know someone who should hear it, share it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos.